Coming up on This Week in Radio Tech, one of the best ways a thoughtful engineer can help out his customers, that is the talent at the radio station, is to make workflows, flow. What design choices are slowing down your talent's daily work? And what can an engineer do to help smooth out those roadblocks? Well, Chris Tobin joins us to give us some real-world information about where the engineer made a big difference for on-air operations. This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Lavo and the Crystal Clear Virtual Radio Console. Crystal Clear is the console with a multi-touch touchscreen interface. And by Direct Current Broadcast e-newsletter. Get Direct Current in your inbox every Thursday with technical pointers putting you and your facility at an advantage. Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. So delighted that you're here. This is the show. We talk about everything from, the microphone to the light bulb at the top of the tower. Yeah, I've been saying for 4 or 5 years, I've got a tower light over here. I really do. I turned it on during one show. It's really bright. I need to modify it so it has regular light bulbs in it, maybe some LED bulbs, so I can show it. I can show it right here. Hey, it would look at that blank space on the wall. It would go there really well. I will get around to that. Some Saturday, that'll be on my honey-do list. This is the show where we talk about everything audio, radio, RF, digital streaming, things like that, all about the radio industry. And we talk engineering. Sometimes we talk in a little bit more existential terms, how engineers can get along with management or each other or with the people who they're serving. So that's going to be a part of our subject today. So I'm Kirk Harnack in Nashville, Tennessee. I work for the folks at the Telos Alliance. And my co-host is with me. That's Chris Tobin in New Jersey. Hello, Chris. Welcome in.
Hello, Kirk. Yes, I'm in New Jersey in a voice booth that's being renovated, as you can see. I'll just use this little pointer. There we go. There's some
that wasn't the prettiest thing I've ever seen.
No, but it's technical, so why not have it in the background? And then there's the mic boom, Luxo boom, we're all familiar with. And then in the event of an emergency, there's also the telephone behind me there, just above my shoulder. And for those wondering what this wand is, it's a 5.8 gig collinear antenna. There's the end connector.
Yeah.
There we go. So it's for my Wi-Fi setup. I just happen to be checking some stuff out today.
So
not using Wi-Fi. Today's wired.
Plenty of engineers watching the show understand. Could you grab that antenna again? Describe for us where the energy comes out and where it doesn't come out of an antenna like that.
All right. Well, an antenna like this, let's see if I can do this the right way. Basically, the energy comes out this way. Okay, all 360 degrees. It does not really come out much of up here. And the collinear design is actually, it's like I think it's halfway of a quarter wave elements back and forth. So if you can think of like a wires, little stubs, daisy chain back and forth down the line, and that's the collinear. This is, I think, a 5.8 gig. I'm sorry, 8 decibel isotropic. So it's 8 dB over folded dipole.
So it has an apparent gain over an isotropic or point source radiator. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. At 5.8 gig, 8 dB is a lot. However, at 5.8 gigahertz, you also remember it does not penetrate walls and structures very well. So that 8 dB is enough to at least get you where you should be in a close proximity. Though I have used this on many occasions in an extreme distance, so as we know.
Well, we're going to be talking a little bit about just because I want to. One of our topics today is going to be drones, and a lot of those work on 5.8 gig, I think.
Yes, they do. There's 2.4 on some, and then others 5.8. But I think more of them are doing 5.8, and then so it could be on 900 meg as well. There's some stuff on 900 meg.
Well, I guess that's true. I will find out because I don't know. I just ordered. In a few days, I will be the proud owner of a DJI Mavic Pro. So we'll see. I'll find out all about the RF when we get to that. So
make sure we get some tower inspection video.
We're going to shoot some video. We're going to shoot some tower video. It's going to be really cool. You're not supposed to fly next to structures, so I'll be sure and not fly next to the structure. So there you go.
Fly with a distance and have a zoom lens.
And the drone will be registered as required, FAA, and I'm a licensed pilot. So I apparently don't have to take the Part 107 test because I am a licensed pilot. If I want to use it for commercial purposes, I think there's some more stuff to do. So we'll be checking into all that. But hey, that's not our topic today, other than we are going to talk about drones a bit more at some point. I want to remind you, our show is brought to you by the folks at the Telos Alliance and by the folks at Lavo, and we'll be hearing from them in just a little while as the show goes along. I really wish that you would patronize our sponsors, because that's how the show keeps going. That's how we can at least pay a couple of bills around here. All right, so today we're talking about workflow. And workflow is a word that, I don't know, it just seems we hear that word a lot. Go to the NAB show and go to any of the big company video booths, and they have big signs to talk about video workflow. And I'm not really entirely sure what that means. I guess maybe it means the sort of stuff that we do every day, but accounting for it, and that is diagramming it or studying it, and make sure that we have the tools, the layout that we need. I guess whenever I post a new show of This Week in Radio Tech, I have a workflow. After doing 332 shows already, I have a copy paste workflow that works for me, and I can get the show posted in typically under 10 minutes or so once the files are available. And then there's workflow, things that I found the wrong ways to do it, and then I found the right way to do it, and that way that's quickest and efficient. So maybe, Chris, you can help us understand what we mean when we say workflow, especially the kind of workflow we're talking about. Not engineering workflow. We're not talking about what engineers do. We're talking about what our customers do. And our customers are the people who use the gear that we install and maintain. So kind of pontificate on that a bit, would you?
Sure. Well, the workflow for us engineers is basically what we're accustomed to is, how do we set up a studio? How do we set up a transmitter site? How do we go from point A to point B? So let's talk about those who create content, those that we work with in the studios. We'll start with the on-air studio. On many occasions, have you had the opportunity to build a studio, or maybe rebuild a current studio? And the layout, nobody ever asked the question about the layout. You just go ahead and do the famous or the popular industry U-shaped furniture layout, console in the middle, approximately 8 inches of desk space in front of the console, hopefully. And then you put CD players or certain playout devices on the right-hand side, and then there's a couple of things on the left-hand side, like there's pedestals, there's the furniture pedestals, and that's pretty much the layout. Well, that's a pretty outdated setup. And I've been to a couple of places where folks, the announcers in some stations, just continue to complain and try to say, what is going on? I can't get anything done right. So the workflow we have to think about is how you get from point A to point B in creating material. And one of the things I discovered, and I had the pleasure of doing this many years ago, and I think I may have mentioned it once or twice, I worked for an old news station, and we were building new studios from the ground up. I'm sorry, first time around, we replaced the old consoles with new consoles. So the studio updates were being available. So we actually got new furniture, and a new layout was being considered. So the workflow there was, from engineering, my job was to talk to the anchors and say, okay, I'm going to sit down next to you and go through your normal 1 hour newscast or half-hour newscast, whatever it is, and let me watch what you're doing and tell me what you find to be, say, inconvenient or difficult to move quickly. And it was fascinating to find out the things that they work around and how they move their arm this way, or they do this. I literally am showing you physical motions. I'm moving my body, my hands around, because that's what they would do to get around the computer monitors that were sitting halfway on the console. And I know many of you in the audience know what I'm saying. Or those that have monitor arms that just don't reach all the way in front of the person, so it's off to the side. How many times you have somebody looking at a automation playout system, and they have to sort of turn their head to read the lines or whatever it is they do, and then turn back toward the microphone? How many times have you had that problem? So looking at that workflow and thinking, wow, how do we improve things? And it was fascinating, the stuff you come up with, and you realize that we take so much for granted that we just do things for the sake of doing it, and then never ask the person using the room, hey, could this be done better? I worked in a studio last year where a production studio control room looking into a talk studio. So you have the standard large window looking through. And the interesting part about the design was the standard U-shaped furniture, pedestals on both left and right-hand side of the console. And oddly enough, the positioning of the furniture was such that the left-hand side of the U shape of the furniture actually was facing the studio window to the talk studio. Oddly enough, nobody thought to ask, why would you have a pedestal blocking the window toward the talk studio?
Yeah, blocking the view.
Blocking the view. So what people call in television or in videographers, the sight line, or a photographer, sight lines.
Yeah.
So sight lines are very important in any studio, whether it be radio or television. And I'm standing there watching this. I just happened to get the setup. I'm looking around, I'm like watching them produce this program. And the producer at the console is turning their head. So I'm moving my head off camera. I'm back on camera. I'm moving my head left to right, trying to see the talk person and the guest, the host, to get what? Verbal communication, as we all know. And I was just fascinated. I'm like, wow, this is crazy. So after a couple of weeks of watching this and realizing this is definitely an impediment, because talking with the producers, I asked them, I said, so if the studio could be laid out differently, what would you suggest? And a couple of them came up with some interesting changes. And one of them was just being able to see the host better. I was like, okay. Took the furniture, the pedestal out, and now you have a clean light sight line of the entire window, which is about a 6 foot wide window, about 3 foot high. Mm-hmm. And without telling anybody what I did, I just simply did it. Didn't make a big to-do. Folks came back in to do their show, and after about the first half hour, they realized they weren't moving around trying to see the host.
Okay.
The quality of the show changed. The quality of the show changed, the content, the delivery, everything about it. And I just was fascinated. I was like, wow, this is, it's interesting that nobody gave it any thought. Now, I'm not blaming, laying fault on any one person or group of people. It's just, we just do things in our business these days, just for the sake of, well, this is how it's always done. It's like the classic argument over microphones. Is it an RE20 or SM7? Or should it be a Neumann? Well, it depends on your application. But for most people, they're going to build a studio. They get you a laundry list. I guarantee you there's an RE20, at least one or two of them on the list. Why? Well, that's what we always did. But nowadays, technology, as you pointed out, Kirk, with your video on a Windows platform or a Mac platform, it depends on what you need, how you want to use it, what you got to do, that dictates the tools. Nowadays, we have so many tools at our disposal, we have to really rethink taking that cookie cutter or template of the last 30, 40 years and say, okay, time to rethink it. So I'm going to go back now to the first story, which was the news station studio construction we were doing.
Right.
So with the new consoles we were getting, in this case, they happen to be Axia consoles we were installing. So with the Axia console, you have a video monitor that gives you the VU meters and various other indicators of the network of the system. And then to the right of that, we had three monitors. We had a MediaTouch OMT commercial playout machine. Then we had a Burley newsroom software screen, and then we had the Axia screen. So Axia screen would be in the center, sort of in the back center, because the Burley screen was where they read the scripts for the newscast and stuff. And what I discovered we built a mock studio. Before we did any changes to the current on-air studios, there's 3 studios that go to air. They rotate throughout the hour. So the 4th studio, which is production, we decided to make a mock studio out of that to get the input or feedback from the announcers. And it was fascinating things we discovered. One, like in an F-18 Hornet cockpit, if you notice the heads-up display is, as my hand is in front of my face right now, for those who don't have the camera, the video, I have my hand open in front of my face, and it's right there, eye sight line. Discovered that when you have the monitor at eye level, when someone is sitting, they can read their scripts with much better ease, and also use the console beneath them using muscle memory, muscle memory, to move the faders and select sources and play things out. Whereas in the old setup, the monitor was somewhat up, back, a little off-center because of the furniture, and we just couldn't make the monitor arm reach. And you could tell by their delivery things changed. The other thing we discovered, and with the Axia screen, we had the clock, right? There's a clock on the screen. Everyone's convenient. Wow, it's great. Look at it. It looks right in front of us. This was the best. This had to be the most exciting part of my project. I never even thought this would come true. So we build the mock studio. Anchors do a dry run of a particular newscast. I'm listening very carefully to the air checks, and I'm noticing, so-and-so news time, 3:15. Do the news, weather, traffic, blah, blah, blah. Such and such news time, 3:22. And I'm noticing there's a pause. I'm thinking, this doesn't sound right. I go back to the actual air check of on the air of the same anchor, but in the on-air studio at a different time of the day. And I'm noticing, such and such news time, 4:15.
Right.
Such and such news
No
time,
pause.
4:17. No pause. So then I'm thinking, what's going on? I spend a weekend reading up on the brain and how the eye and hand and coordination, everything else. And I came across a paper, a neurology paper at the University of Pennsylvania, and they talked about how the brain caches images. And what we do, the brain will cache images, and unless the image changes dramatically, it retains a good portion of it. So think of this. Typical console has a digital display. You're a news anchor, or maybe you're a music DJ, and you're accustomed to, every day, seeing a digital display for the time. But now you're put in a room where the digital display is now a analog clock, circular clock. Now, on the surface, you say, oh, well, what's the big deal? It's like wearing a watch, digital, or analog, whatever you want to call it, sweep hands. The problem was the brain had cached the digital display, with the exception of the last digits that change, every minute. And the analog clock, you have to keep focusing. You have to look at the clock, brain has to reset, see what time it is, and go back to doing stuff. Now, at first, I told this to the program director, and he looked at me like I was nuts. He's like, really? Now you're going to tell me this is like psychology here? I said, I think there's some merit.
Yeah.
So without telling anybody anything about why I'm doing this, I placed a 3-inch digital display timepiece at the top of the console where we normally would see that same clock in the old, the current on-air studio. Run the mock newscasts, play back the air check, and sure enough, the time hacks are without pause. And I sat there going, what the devil? I cannot believe it's something as simple as that. And that's what made me think about workflows ever since then. This is 12 years ago. I'm like, okay, we're going to keep going, doing stuff. So when it comes to workflow, something as subtle as a clock display can make or break the success of what you're doing.
What's interesting, Chris, about that story is I thought that you were going to go the other way with it. And I realize people are different in how they look at a clock and cache an image. But by the way, let me back up and say that the consoles that you put in, I don't know if it was an option at that time yet or not, but it is now, that you can choose a digital display or an analog display. And if you choose the digital, there's a small analog display on the same screen.
It was not an option at the time. It was not an option.
Gotcha. Well, probably because of your experience, they made it an option. But one thing I was going to say is, and listen, I could be faking myself out about this, but when you say you cache an image, I thought that you were going to, if you glance at an analog clock, you cache one image, of where those hands are. When I think about a clock, I know I'm caching one image. Right now I can see the analog clock on the a huge one on the wall upstairs in our TV room. I've got one just outside of this room. There's analog clocks all around. Oftentimes I'll wear an analog watch today. I'm wearing a digital one. But I guess you could also cache, but see, to me, caching in your brain, a digital one, I'm caching several digits. It's not one image. It's like an image that with several parts. And
right.
I don't know, for me, I would think it would be the other way around. But I realize if you're used to glancing at a clock, perhaps while you say the words, news time, 4:20, and you glance and you see that 4:20 on the clock, well, that's pretty easy to do too, and all you got to do is glance once at it. But it would be interesting. Now, your experience was that their brains wanted the digital clock, right?
Right. Because remember, they're just not looking at a clock at that moment in time. They're reading a news script. So they're reading a story, playing an audio bite that goes with the story, and then the script calls for a time hack, and now you have to do the time hack. So now I have to take their eyes off the screen where the script is, look down, just looking down very slightly, to just below the screen where the script is to see the clock. Whereas before they had to look up and over to see the analog clock that was currently being displayed on the new system. So you had a few things going on there. It was just not just looking down. You had to look up, take a break for a second. Your brain had to say, okay, I'm refocusing on where I'm going and hoping to remember that the hands are in the right spot. It's subtle, but it was just fascinating. And I did it a couple of times because the program director was like, no, this can't be right. And so I took the clock out. They did the air checks. He calls me up at home. He goes, all right, fine. You win. Got it. Let's put the clock in the studio. Let's figure out a way to make it work. And I'm like, all right, good. And when we after we built that facility and we moved to a new one later downtown, we set up the monitors across, 3 across. Or was it 4? I think we wound up with 4 monitors at this point, and they were all at eye level. And again, the clock was just below where the scripts are, just at the right angle, and it worked like a champ. As a matter of fact, working with those designers, those architects and the integrators, they just looked at me. I was like, it was nuts. They wanted to put the monitors in a square, 4 square, and put it in front of the anchor. And I was like, no. I don't want the anchor looking up, moving their head. They need to just go left to right, because that's how they're going to do their stuff. When they're doing is commercial, the faders on the left are for the commercial automation playout. That's where the monitor is. When they're doing their audio scripts from Burley, the news program, their faders are in front of them. And when they're going to do traffic or anything else, it's on the right-hand side. So the other monitor is for the other stuff they have.
So speaking of studio design and workflow, then I remember when and again I work for Tello, so I remember when the Axia Element first came out, and it requires a separate screen to show stuff that, I mean, we think there's a lot of rich information there, and you should, Mr. Engineer, you should make room in your studio. It's important enough to make room for a screen. And, you do get a lot of pushback on that from some people. Well, we're trying to reduce the number of screens in our studio. We got too many now. And so I had the pleasure of going to several broadcasters who licked this problem. And the first one that I noticed was Minnesota Public Radio. And they were an early adopter of audio over IP via Axia consoles. And they, at the time, I don't think there was anything easily commercial available. They developed, with the help of a local a welding shop or something, or a furniture maker, they developed a crescent-shaped monitor holder that was movable all at the same time. The entire crescent would move and would carry 3 at the time. I think they had room for 4 monitors. And so one of them was the Axia monitor, and then there were others for their music playout system and other things. So nowadays you see a lot of these on the market, and I go to plenty of stations where I do see monitors in a 4 square arrangement, and yeah, people have to look way up from that. One of the control rooms that I built in Mississippi, it's a 4 square. I don't like it, but we had to work with the gear that we had, and we don't have money to go buy an $800 monitor stand. So, but I also got to make a trip to Italy to see the very first audio over IP radio installation there at Radio Sud Tirol, or South Tyrol, where they speak German, because it used to be part of Austria. And they themselves developed a system for their monitors to be in a crescent shape around them. And interestingly enough, they took the one Axia monitor and put it off somewhere else, because they had such good level control, they didn't really need to glance at it very much. They needed to be there somewhere, but it was actually a couple feet farther away and up high, because they knew they needed it, but not very often. But the stuff they needed was right in front of them. And that gives rise to another development in studio design, and that is not only low monitors that are just above the audio console, so you have a good sight line over the top of them, but also these low microphones where the mic arm comes in even under the monitor and just above the console faders, or just from the side, or over faders that you're not using, and your mic arm actually comes from underneath. And those are really popular nowadays, especially with studios where they install pan, tilt, zoom cameras to do either video streaming now or in the future. You've seen those, right, Chris? Those low mic arms?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're very handy. And they're really very versatile when you have a room full of monitors and you're doing various things. Yeah, absolutely. That's workflow with what you were talking about, and what I was mentioning. These are just simple examples. They may be complicated for some, and yes, if you don't have the luxury of a budget that allows you to get a monitor arms that allow you to do a crescent shape arrangement or whatever you might need, you work with what you have. And I will say, with the news operation that I mentioned earlier, the Axia monitor was put off to the side. We had a very good level control, so we didn't use it much more than just a confidence monitor at times. But that's what you have to work at. Think about for workflow. If you're a production studio and you're working with a performance space, do you have the performance space laid out in such a way that your cabling can, is what it should be? Does it make sense for the musicians? Does it make sense for the talk shows if you're doing talk shows? Do you have, and when I say, it's important to think about workflow, think of the times when you're working on a project at your facility and you get a phone call saying, "Can you come down to Studio 12? We've got an issue with a TV crew that needs audio from the studio because we're doing an interview X, Y, and Z." Maybe, when you fix the problem, you get them set up. You say to yourself, "How about I put a panel in that room or a method by which they can grab the audio out of the control room whenever there's a TV crew?" What does that do? One, you don't get interrupted. Two, gives the studio ops folks, or I'll call them the people producing, more control and comfort zone. See, this is the other thing you have to worry about, or think about, actually. I guess worry and think about it. Even though we may understand the tech part, the technology and the build out and all the various things that go into producing a studio and building a studio, that is, and producing content, the people using the equipment, the people handling everything, have to have a certain comfort zone, a comfort feeling. Otherwise, they cannot do their job. And if they feel intimidated by a studio that doesn't have everything they need to get the job done, I can assure you that will get back to somebody at some point, and you will be at the short end of a stick trying to figure out how to fix a room and not know why you're getting basically browbeaten by somebody above. And I've worked in many places where this has happened, where we have a studio and a TV crew comes in to do a documentary, and right away they say, "Can we get output of the mixer?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, we got it right here." They go like, "What?" Boom, plug right in. I walk away, and they're off for the next 6 hours doing nothing.
And most radio stations don't have that so conveniently, do they?
Exactly. No, and also if you do that, remember, make sure you label it line or mic level, depending on what methodology you use. If you do decide to make it line level, which is typically what you do, make sure you have available in the control room a attenuating pad, because most TV crews don't have line inputs on the cameras.
Right, they're mic level inputs. Yeah,
exactly. See, once you do this, then you can step away and let the ops folks make some great stuff, and you can look like the hero, because they could say, "Wow, you guys, it's great to work with you. I don't have a problem with the studio." And they say, "Yeah, well, that's our engineering people."
I tell you what, after our first sponsor break, we're going to come back. I've got a couple of studio design horror stories, and I'm sure you do as well, that really point to, we need to do better. But I think we are. I want to point out the very latest edition of Radio Magazine. Radio Magazine. This is the edition that is labeled January 2017. And in here, there's a story of the new, I want to say it's the new Cumulus facility in Chicago. And you may have seen, those of you who are into such things, you may have seen a video on YouTube about where they introduced Mancow to his new studios. And here we go. The headline is "Cumulus Emphasizes Style in the Windy City." And it's a great article written by Mark Greenhouse. And it actually shows off. Well, first of all, this studio, beautiful studio, downtown Chicago, looking at picture windows, looking outside at the beautiful downtown Chicago area. But then they emphasize the organization of the racks. And so much audio cabling now has been replaced by so much Ethernet cabling. So much of what we do is Ethernet. And hey, believe me, if we were doing this with audio cabling, there'd be a ton more of it. They also, in the article, point out, and the Cumulus design engineers took the trouble to build out a beautiful glassed rack room. So hey, I think it kind of helps keep the engineering shop, or the rack room anyway, nice and clean. And then finally, let me flip to the right page, we have a picture of a couple of studios here. And I think this one is the Loop in Chicago. But this layout, this design, I'm not saying it's ideal. I don't know. It probably suits their needs just fine. But this design that you see in so many new facilities is, shall we say, informed by mistakes of the past. And so in this studio, they do have an overhead mic arm, but it's barely overheaded. It just rises just above the monitor. The monitors are low. It looks like there's 5 of them in this particular control room that they're showing here, and then plenty of room for guests and co-hosts to sit down. They have room to work, and so they've taken the effort to make sure people have what they need right in front of them. And that's a lot of this kind of workflow. These people who are on the air, they're creatives. There's a morning guy at our stations in Mississippi, and he's the son of a pretty famous engineer. But the son ain't no engineer. But he's a great creative guy. He's fantastically creative. But when something goes wrong, I got to put on my, okay, he's not an engineer hat, and we talk in the terms that a creative person would talk in terms of. So it's a good thing to, and I don't always remember that. Sometimes the conversation goes askew at first, and then oh yeah, that's right. He's a creative guy, doesn't really know this, and so anyway, we'll have a couple of horror stories coming up in a minute. Chris Tobin is along here, and I'm Kirk Harnack on This Week in Radio Tech. It's episode number 333, where we're talking about studio workflow. By the way, I want you to stay tuned toward the end of the episode. I got some announcements to make about what guests are coming up. Pretty amazing guests you're going to really like. So I'm excited about them. So hang on, I'll tell you about those. Our show is brought to you in part by the folks at Lavo, L-A-W-O. Now, most of you know me as a broadcast engineer, an on-air personality, the host of the TWiRT podcast. Well, what you may not know is that for almost 10 years, I worked for the folks at Telos in a capacity where I was traveling around the world, selling broadcast equipment internationally. Now, that job took me all over the place. I mean, almost every continent. I guess we didn't go to Antarctica, but everywhere else we went. And I've seen a lot of broadcasting in a lot of countries, and the different imaginative ways that people do things. They're pretty fascinating, kind of hand in hand with what we're talking about today. That's one of the reasons I'm excited to introduce you to our sponsor, Lavo. That's L-A-W-O, German company, L-A-W-O. Go to the website at lavo.com/TWiRT. Now, Lavo's famous around the world for TV audio console and for video as well, especially for those high-profile events like the Olympics and World Cup Soccer and the Grammy Awards. But when the broadcast is mission critical, you're very likely to find a Lavo console there. Now, the stuff is really well built, over-engineered, it's redundant. The backups have backups in some cases. But because there are no do-overs in live event broadcasting, dead air is really no good for your career. Well, you might be thinking, why should I care? I'm not doing TV. This is a radio show here we're talking about. Well, radio guys hate dead air even more than TV guys, which is why broadcasters like NPR, the CBC, and the BBC, to name a few, buy Lavo radio consoles. Now, being involved in TV and radio around the world means that Lavo thinks about the future a lot, too. Everyone knows that all types of media are converging on a common IP delivery platform. We just saw that in the Cumulus installation. Lavo is ready for that with broadcast gear that can handle audio, video, and control of every studio device using a single integrated off-the-shelf computer network. And after that, well, we're looking at virtualization and broadcasting from the cloud. Lavo is building those tools right now. So if bulletproof reliability, 5 nines of uptime, and being future-proof are important to you, you owe it to yourself to find out about Lavo. Go to their website, and I'd really appreciate it, this is Kirk speaking here, if you would let them know that you heard this on TWiRT by going to Lavo, LAWO.com/TWiRT to find out more. LAWO, Lavo.com/TWiRT. And thanks very much to Lavo for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, it's episode 333. Chris Tobin and I are chatting about improving workflow for your customer. You, the engineer, your customer, who are the people who use the equipment that you design, install, lay out, and maintain. So, Chris, years ago, this would have been, good golly, 22, 23, 24 years ago, I was called into a pair of FM radio stations in Memphis to try to make the announcers happy because they were pretty unhappy. Now, the engineer for the place was a man of large stature. He was tall. He had long arms. He had long legs. He was a big guy, and he designed the studios accordingly. Unfortunately, many of the announcers, female ones particularly, were 5'2", 4'11", and they really couldn't reach the equipment. So they had purchased, that had built 2 studios, gorgeous studios, of big Auditronics consoles. I mean, oversized. And actually, we need to talk about that for a second, Chris. Oversized consoles. Back some years ago, I was very actively showing people consoles from my employer, Telos. And one of the common things I heard was, we have to have at least 40 faders on our console. 40. Or we can't do with anything less than 28 faders on our console. And so we would be, well, and they thought that because that's what they'd always had. Now, why had they always had that? Well, of course, because older consoles were not flexible. They may have had an A input and a B input on each fader. Some consoles even had a C input, so you could wire 3 different sources to a fader. But typically, you want your broadcast show to go with every source that you were going to use would have its own fader. And if you take all the shows together in aggregate and add up all the sources that they might use, and plus the weekend sports shows or whatever may be on the weekends, you had to have, if you could afford it, and many big stations could, you had to have that many faders. And the B inputs were stuff that was just rarely, if ever, used, like that auxiliary panel down on the console. So down on the furniture. So we've always thought about sizing consoles as, 1 fader per input, or at least 1 fader per input that we would use on a regular basis. And then we had to be careful that we would group faders correctly so that, as you described, Chris, operators wouldn't have to cross their hands to move faders while they're reaching for this button or reaching for that button. Well, when the current crop of consoles came out, namely audio over IP consoles, because they kind of needed to have a software guts inside, we entered a world 11, 12 years ago where any source could be on any fader and could be switched either manually pretty quickly or just by bringing up a new preset on the console. So that right there, Chris, has been a big change in how we select audio consoles. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 radio stations that are using 8 fader consoles. Now, I realize they're not in New York City, but they have active morning shows, plenty of people coming and going, talking, putting the phones on the air, and 8 faders. And that's enough for them. That's just fine. I got one station that actually, because we couldn't afford a bigger console, we were using a hand-me-down from Axia, had 4 faders. But it was just enough for what this guy needed, what the morning show needed to do. So now that we have more flexibility, we don't necessarily have to have that many faders, as long as we still think about what's the most complicated show that's going to be done. How many sources does it need? And let's make sure we at least get a console that has that many faders. Chris, your thoughts on that before I get to my horror story?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the newer technology, with whether it's Wheatstone, Axia, Lavo, AEQ, any of the guys with assignable console sources and stuff. You still have to remember, though, as you pointed out, what is the most, not complicated, but what's the largest source show you have? What is the workflow? Like, for example, that is, I worked an old sports station, and when we were building new studios, one of the requests was, can we have a, we'll say 28 fader console? And everybody balked at that. And like, 28 faders? It's a sports talk show. What do you need that for? Well, they forgot about the fact that we have stringers in the field. At any given time, we're probably covering 6 to 8 different games, and you can't sit there and dial them on a router source to bring it up when they're going between the elements. So you have a sports talk show person with guests, they're talking about a game, and since that going on, they want to go to somebody quickly. You need to pre-assign them on a fader and go with it. Now, that's maybe an extreme for some, but others, you don't think about it, and all of a sudden you have somebody sitting there trying to change a preset. And then all of a sudden the board changes, they get stuck because they're panicking to move quickly. There's another part of the workflow. The workflow is timing. When I used to train board operators, people that would produce shows and be the operator on the board to mix everything, I always told them, I said, think of it as a game of chess. You have to look at the 3 or 4 moves ahead. So if you're doing a talk show, whether it's spoken word for sports, spoken word for just talk in general, think about where they're going next. Where are they? Do they have a guest in studio? Do they have a guest on the phone? Is the guest on the phone maybe going to be asked to talk with a caller? Think ahead and look at that. And that also dictates how you lay out the console or the number of faders you may need. Now, in most cases, an 8 fader console is probably more than sufficient in most applications, maybe 12 if you have to. But you have to think about how you're going to use it and where your thought process is. And I can tell you that from folks who don't think in the terms of looking 2 or 3 steps ahead, they usually invariably run into a collision. Something goes wrong. There's a silence. There's the wrong source goes to air. how many times I've sat in an audio control booth in a TV station and watched them frantically try to bring sources up because the operator's not thinking ahead. He's just looking at that moment in time. They're watching the program, and they're just paying attention to that moment in time, not thinking, oh, what's the next step that TV anchor is going to go to, or sportscaster. And you watch any show, any live show, and you'll guarantee you can tell when you've got the A team or B team operators, and that's part of it. And it's very important to understand. But today's technology is great. You can do a lot now with those consoles compared to the old days of the Auditronics or PRD and Ward Becks. And I'm going to have my 36 fader console with a sliding chair for my broadcast because that's the best we can do. And there are people in the audience know exactly what I'm talking about.
Sliding chair. You're from it looks like a recording, a Nashville recording studio when you get a console that big. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so the horror story, and I won't name names. And actually, the guy who designed the studio, like I said before, big tall guy, big arm spread, probably 6.5 foot, from fingertip to fingertip, and he designed the studio. Large audio console from Auditronics, beautiful, nice furniture. It was he spec'd it all out, had it locally built, so it was built by people who didn't know how to build broadcast furniture, but he spec'd it out well enough to where everything was easy access. The access panels were great, but he didn't take into account how people have to work. Oh, and there was one other constraint that he had a problem with, and that was the on-air rooms just happened to be, and of course I disagreed with this totally. He probably did too, but management overrode it. The control rooms were in the core of the building. They didn't have windows. The salespeople got windows. The salespeople who are out of the office most of the day got windows. And so, I'm glad to see that changing with these high-profile installations that I see some of the big groups still doing. And I've been somewhat close to Cumulus over the years, so I've seen what they do, and they do tend to build nice studios in big markets with good visibility outside. Well, anyway, the poor engineer had to deal with this. It was a very wide room and very narrow front to back, so he kind of made the furniture fit the room. That is, he made it wider than it had to be, wider than it should have been, such that imagine yourself sitting at the audio console, in the middle of the audio console. Actually, I think it was a stand-up room, so you could put a stool. Yeah, you could sit on a stool or stand up. The cart machines, remember cart machines? This was before automation. The cart machines were over to the operator's right, and they were too far away to reach with a normal hand reach. You had to move over to them in order to put a card in or take a card out. They were that far away. And when the station was first wired up, he hadn't wired the remote starts. So not only did the jock have to leave the center of the console to go load the next carts in, but the operator had to, talking on mic, had to say, and we'll be back right after this message. Come over here to push the start button. It was insane. And then there were other things in the room that were far on the other side. And the turntables were like in the back parking lot. They not that they used turntables very often. Oh, the CD players. The CD players were also outside of arm's reach. So you had to move over to push those buttons. It was crazy. So so the first thing I did was I did set up the remotes for everything so they would have that. I couldn't change the furniture, but we tried to move everything that the jocks needed over toward the cart machines and the CD players. So that was one design disaster. The other is actually I should refer to this as a disaster. It's more of a curiosity, Chris. I've noticed that older TV stations, from the production control room, where the director and the production switcher people were, they oftentimes had windows. They had a sight line down into what usually the studio would be on a lower level. I got to visit the studio where they produced Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in Pittsburgh, and it was that way. And I used to work at a radio station years ago that actually used to be a TV station. And the sales bullpen was in what used to be the TV studio. And one of our control rooms had the windows, it had a view down into the sales bullpen because it used to be the production control room. But nowadays, so it used to be important to have those sight lines. But nowadays, the TV stations I go into, there's no sight lines between the production control room and the studio. Do you have some thoughts on that? Is that just not important anymore?
I think a lot of it has to do with the advancing technology. Where was I? This was like 1981, 82. I remember visiting a television station, trying to learn things in the business. And I remember going to a station that had exactly that kind of a setup, where the control room was slightly above and looked out onto the studio floor. And I remember asking, well, why is it important to see it this way? And if memory serves me right, the engineer at the time told me, and it makes sense, the cost of video monitors, think about this, the cost of video monitors was such that it was cheaper just to have the windows looking out onto the studio so the producers, directors, TDs, the technical directors, and everybody else could just see where the people are, what's position, who's doing what, where the cameras are located, and what's happening. Fast forward to years later, and I remember going to a studio, actually it's when I worked at ABC, and almost all the studios where I was working at ABC, there were no sight lines, but I did notice there was an enormous number of monitors that were dedicated just for certain sightline capability. So I'm going to venture a guess that back in the day, the cost, it either wasn't practical or they just never thought of it. So you always have to have a sightline because that was just human nature, being able to see, really see. I'm visually looking at the studio rather than visually looking at the studio through a LCD screen or a CRT. I think that's probably a combination of both. But because I've watched folks who work in environments where they can see what they're doing, and I watch folks who they can't see it, and so we'll say producing by wire, like fly by wire. They're basically looking at an LCD screen, preview, program, camera 1, 2, 3, and they're just sort of building an image in their head as to what things look like.
So it sounds like TV stations are moving away from sight lines, and radio stations are moving. It's still important to radio stations. So when they think about it, in fact, at our stations in Mississippi, we had a guy there for a while who assisted in getting a second control room ready, and he knocked out walls, put in windows, and we've started a news department there that we didn't have before. He knocked out a wall to put a window in there, so there are sight lines between the two control rooms and the news department. So that so we can so you don't have to assume somebody's there. Maybe they're not there. Now we go to Angie with the news, and she's not there. So that's a workflow.
That's a workflow.
Yeah, that's a workflow. So the other thing that that has become important to me, and as an engineer, I've not been nearly as involved in this as I would like to or should be. I'm sure there are plenty of you engineers out there listening who say, "Oh yeah, I take care of that for my stations." So at our radio stations in Mississippi, we have under one roof, we have now 5 radio stations running Rivendell. There's Rivendell servers that from where all the audio is stored and played back. Well, 3 years ago, we weren't on the Rivendell then, but 3 years ago, we were paying a guy part-time to come in and basically take all the commercials that had been produced and transfer them into, I think then we were using probably a Scott Studios, it was probably branded Google at the time, a Scott Studios system, an SS32 system. So we paid a guy to, type in all the information for the cart label, the electronic cart label, dub everything in, take programs that would come in on CD, which hardly any do now, but CD, dub those in, type the right stuff in, get the segment lengths right for playback over the weekend or whenever they played. Then those programs that came in via FTP, that same guy, part-time, would have to shuffle all those around, get them put into the Scott Studio system and type everything in. And I don't know how much automatic might have been available. I wasn't involved with that. My role there is pretty much hardware, make the hardware work, and then let the people who work there, worry about the software part of the workflow. But this guy that was working for us was very unreliable. He had a lot of health issues. He didn't make a lot of money, but it was money out of our pocket. And if he didn't show up, man, we didn't have spots that wouldn't run. And if he didn't show up when John Tesh or whatever needed to be put in the automation system, we'd be running John Tesh liners from the night before, and that's no good. So when we got the Rivendell system, we worked with a software developer who was very interested in helping us. And there may be off-the-shelf stuff to do this, but he developed a couple pieces of software. One of them is called WebGopher. And it automatically, it's got all kinds of presets for all different kinds of automation systems, including the old Scott SS32, including Rivendell. There are some others in there as well. And it will grab, it has FTP built in, so it will grab all the segments, all the liners. It'll grab, if you have jocks who do voice tracking and they put it in Dropbox, well, we're running Dropbox. It comes down automatically to a specific folder. This WebGopher software will look at the folders, grab new files. It will parse the file name and rearrange it to be correct for the automation system, dropping things that aren't necessary or that we don't want to show up on the as played log or the metadata. In other words, so it'll fix it up for metadata purposes. It'll time it. It'll even check the levels and correct that if you want to do some normalization, and then import it into the automation system. So it did away, and frankly it did a much better job than this poor sick guy was doing for us, and it was reliable. It is reliable, and it does this 24/7, and saved us about $30,000 a year over this part-time fellow. And it just sits there and chugs away and does the job. And if somebody changes the format of the files they send, now there's a dash between all the date items, and there used to be a space. So whatever, the software can be adjusted to parse it correctly. So what I'm getting at is in terms of workflow, I think that engineers ought to look and see what's available for your automation system and your stations and the way you operate. Maybe WebGopher or a program or a system like WebGopher would do you a lot of good if you're not already using something like that, and can markedly improve the reliability. Now, I got to tell you, when you first start using something like that, you've got to check the error log, because you're going to have all kinds of errors for things that you didn't anticipate. So you've got to watch out for that. Chris, I'd like your thoughts on the idea of automated workflow doing the mundane tasks that we used to task people with.
Mundane, automated tasks are very popular now and probably easier to implement than ever before. I'm all for it. There are certain things at a radio station, even TV or internet radio and video, where mundane tasks should be automated. Just allow the others to be more creative and do their thing. But something to consider with workflow thinking, something I just totally forgot about earlier. A couple of places I've worked at when CD players were still popular and being used a lot. One of the things that everybody always did was they'd mount the CD players, and in this case these would be 1RU players or 2RU players, and they'd mount them in the racks, correct, to the right-hand side, because I'm a left-handed person, but everybody in the world I work in is right-handed. They'd put the CD players either at the very top of the pedestal of the rack, or they'd put them in the middle, and they put them on top of each other. And think about what that does. You're an announcer trying to take a CD and place it in a machine and sort of use your peripheral vision. You wind up putting the CD itself in between the equipment because you're trying to figure out where the draw is. And what I used to do is separate the machines with 1RU panels, so you could visually see there's a space between the machines, so you could lock in on where the CD tray is. Sounds crazy, but simple thinking. Now fast forward to, say, more modern stuff you do today in a studio, and you say, okay, I have an automation system that I need to look at stuff. Well, make sure the screen that your announcer or a host has to look at has icons and graphics that are large enough to be seen at a glance, peripheral vision, or if they have to, think of it in terms of a rush. Try and do a test and see how fast can you change something. Does the CPU that it's plugged into respond quick enough? Is the software designed to be quickly move from element to element? Those are things for workflow consideration for an automated tasks. And that's when you'll find out, like an old logging machine, if you're logging your air signal, both program, maybe studio program as well as on air, how many times you forget to look at the machine, all of a sudden you find out that for the last 2 weeks, nothing got recorded. Automated, make sure there's some kind of metric to determine if the machine's working. That comes into a whole nother line of technologies to look at to make sure things are happening. So yeah, there's a lot you can do. Something else to think about. Think when you're doing workflow, and I know it's a term everybody throws around. It's like crazy. Try and be open-minded. And I get into these, how would you say, heated discussions with my peers. And thank goodness it's always at a public house that we do this at. So by the time the night is long, we're all laughing at each other and can't believe we're arguing over these things. And several pints have gone by. The one thing I have to say is with audio over IP technologies, don't be afraid to consider mixing them up. And here's an example. Your radio station, standard radio, right? An FM or AM or AM/FM, and standard broadcast facility. But it just so happens you also have 3 performance studios because you do more than just play music. You actually record, you play back, you do artist interviews, you do all kinds of community stuff. I have discovered, watching and looking at these different technologies, that yes, I could have an AOIP plant all the way through. That's all well and good. But I've discovered that a couple of the other technologies are actually better suited. We'll call it the post-production or AV, audio video industries, the churches and things like that, just to give you examples, not to say it's a church. And I've discovered that I think it's time to start thinking in terms of how do I make a hybrid environment. The reason I say this, I just talked to a friend of mine who just took a job at a TV facility that also happens to have an FM radio station attached to it. And we're talking, and he goes, I don't know what I'm doing. It's a full-blown Axia plant for the FM, for our production and this and that, but we also have the TV studio, and they've got these things, the Everts, SSL, and now the Yamaha consoles, I'm working with Dante. I don't know, I got to figure out how, and I sat there and saying to myself, you know what? That makes total sense, because you can't apply the same radio thinking in a TV studio, but the Dante and Ravenna and some other products, but Dante especially, has created an environment or an ecosystem where you can mix and match things and make it make sense. So when it comes to workflow, think outside, think beyond, and I think it's pretty cool what you can do now. I mean, compared to the days of the 36 fader consoles or 28 faders, what you can do today is it's out of control. And don't think you have to stick with one. Don't say, well, we're a WheatNet plant. Okay, that's all well and good, but that other half of the plant might be better served with this other technology. Or maybe it's an Axia plant, or maybe it could be served with another technology, or Ravenna, or Lavo. I'm sorry, Ravenna. Well, what's the other? There's a couple others out there, CobraNet and all the others. And Dante is one of them. But I thought it was fascinating when we sat and talked, and he was telling me about the whole layout. And I started sketching on paper. I'm like, yeah, you're right. That makes no sense, because the Dante-enabled microphones in that place would be a better choice, because the cable. Wow, that is really cool. So they're having a good time. He's excited to do a hybrid plant. It's just a
actually, I'm really glad you brought this up, because earlier in the show I mentioned that we've got some great guests coming up, and one of our guests coming up is Patrick Kalani with Yamaha. And he's going to be here, I believe, on February the 9th. He's yet to confirm that. He's at the NAMM show right now. But Patrick Kalani produced a video about AES 67, but also a lot of his system was Dante. And then we had Ravenna there, we had QLAN there, and we had Axia Livewire there. And we got them all to work with each other. And so Patrick, anyway, he's going to be here hopefully about 3 weeks from now, February the 9th. And that'll be a great show for understanding not only coming together on a converged, on a common protocol, AES 67, but also he can address running different protocols over the same network at the same time, which actually I guess we did that anyway during our video. There's been a 45-minute video produced on this subject. It's really power-packed. It'll make your head spin. There's a lot of good info there. But anyway, so that's coming up. Chris, we got to take one last break for a sponsor, and then it'll be time for a tip of the week. Hey, our show is brought to you in part, by the way, it's This Week in Radio Tech. Thanks for listening. Chris Tobin's along here, and Kirk Harnack. Our show is brought to you in part by the folks at the Telos Alliance. And one of the things that the Telos Alliance does, and I'm so delighted to be working with these folks. They've been my employer for, coming up on 17 years now. We have at the Telos Alliance an editor named Dave Sarkis, and Dave puts together this publication, Direct Current. Every Thursday, it comes out in your email. And yeah, it's Telos-centric. We tell about what's going on at Telos. We also link you to other technologies. Sometimes we find really interesting articles that are industry-related articles that dovetail real well with the things that we in audio do. So Direct Current is just great to subscribe to. That's what I'm encouraging you to do. I wonder if we could bring up the web page here that I provided for Direct Current. Ah, there we go. So this week, Direct Current features, and I'm just beside myself. I'm so proud of this interview. I got to sit down with Frank Foti late last fall and talk to him one-on-one, 60 minutes style, right? We did an intimate and fantastic interview about success and moving from, hey, he says, I was a kid from Wickliffe, Ohio, and look at where we've been able to take the technologies and this company now. And you'll hear Frank's thoughts about the success that has been achieved and where we're going to go from here. It's really an awesome interview, and you can stop and start the interview. If you don't have 45 minutes to dedicate to the interview, no problem. Just listen to what you can, and then and put it on pause and come back to it. Next, there's an announcement in the newsletter, and that announcement is that SAS has become a LiveWire partner. So, LiveWire is now LiveWire Plus. It contains AES 67 built into that standard. And we're delighted that Sierra Automated Systems, SAS, has elected to partner with us for LiveWire Plus. And so Al Salsi and his gang there really appreciate them coming on board. And it's just great to have them along. Next, there's an article with our guy, Juan Puñed. Juan this is a fantastic. I've had dinner with Juan several times. He is our rep for Latin America and for Canada. And Juan is a broadcaster. He's been in television and radio. And so he really keeps a pulse on what's going on in Latin America, where, hey, what's going on in a lot of the rest of the world doesn't always match what's going on in the U.S. I got to tell you, that's a good thing. It really evens things out. So when the U.S. is down a bit, seems like the rest of the world is moving up. So there's a report there from Juan. And next we have a television division now. It's the TV Solutions Group, TVSG. And this fantastic gentleman came to us. He's the founder of Minnetonka Audio, John Schur. And John now he has the title of the president of the Telos Alliance, and he heads up the TV Solutions Group specifically. And so talking with John is a real pleasure. I got to interview him. We weren't able to get the interview edited, though. We're going to interview him again just as soon as we can, hopefully at NAB. But John's a really smart guy, and you're going to love what he has to say regarding television and television audio, which is what Linear Acoustic and Minnetonka do. Then we have a list here of upcoming events in France, Salon de la Radio. Also, ISE in Europe, NRB show is coming up at the end of February. CabSat in Dubai, and NAB, of course, is coming up as well. And then we have a spotlight on the new VX Prime. So if you want to get into the world of saving a ton of money on your telephone bills for your on-air phone system, there's information right there with VX Prime and using AOIP. So all this is contained in this week's Direct Current, and that's why I want to encourage you to sign up for it. Just go to telosalliance.com/directcurrent, and you can sign yourself up. Hey, unsubscribe anytime that you want to, but you're going to like it. Hey, today's email systems, you can have it go into a folder automatically if you don't want to see it in your inbox. I have it in my inbox. I like to read it as soon as it comes out. So today is when it came out. All right, This Week in Radio Tech is sponsored in part by the folks from the Telos Alliance, and we dearly appreciate it. Chris Tobin, you always have a tip for us. What you got?
This week's tip, one, keep an open mind and listen carefully when dealing with your folks in the studios before you talk about design and making things happen. But as far as workflow ease, I would suggest, again, the Q-Box from Whirlwind. Very handy little device. It's a powered speaker with a few other features on it. The AES box that the Whirlwind folks have, which is great. So if you have to check something with AES, pop it in. You can see all the stats right away. And I know it's an investment, but I can tell you that I've used these boxes on many occasions, both in the studio and on location, outside broadcast locations. And it has helped me to troubleshoot quickly, turn things around, and get back up and running much quicker than if I do the traditional methods of pulling cables, looking for this, try this, do everything else, running about. So there's something to be said. And then one last thing, again, when it comes to workflow, think very carefully. I just recently did some work with a radio station that was doing a TV stream for their outside broadcasts for their sports shows, and a friend of mine asked me to help. How do I streamline what they're doing? Because it's just too many boxes on the table. There's too many failures in the video. It doesn't make sense. So I streamlined the workflow by watching 2 or 3 shows and just watch and see what they did. I was like, oh, look at that, and notice the little things. Watch carefully. Don't assume anything. Don't even go in with a preconceived notion of anything. Just look and watch and listen carefully. And I was able to streamline it. Now they've actually expanded what they're doing because they can actually replicate the equipment layout easier and more economically with 4 other shows. So they went from 1 show to now 4, and they're having a good time. So that's where the benefit of understanding workflow and really being open-minded as an engineer, technician, somebody who's looked to for the technology side of stuff, that's the benefit. That's how it works out. And once you can gain the trust of those who create content and show them you understand the workflow and you can help them achieve their goals, you're in.
Oh,
trust me.
There is
nothing you can't beat that.
Absolutely, gain their trust. Yep.
Yeah,
works
absolutely.
well. Hey, and I have my own little tip, something that I mentioned earlier in the show that has saved our radio station a ton of money and made the whole process of importing things into our automation go pretty automatically, and that's WebGopher. I'll put the link in the show notes, but if you want to check it out, it's webgopher.radioguys.net. And even though I know the people associated with the company, I am not paid by them to promote them or anything like that. Usually I go into my remote computers I go remotely go to my computers at Delta Radio, and I minimize WebGopher so I can go do my work. So I'm not involved with WebGopher, just to let you know that we use it, and there are certainly other things that do some similar stuff, but check it out, webgopher.radioguys.net, and I'll put the link in the show notes. Also, I want to tell you what's coming up for us in the coming weeks. Next week, we've talked about audio over IP a bazillion times on the show. What about video over IP? That's a real up and coming thing. TV stations around the world a few have already moved in that world. Many, many more will be, and so there's a lot of training to be done about that. Well, one of our sponsors, Lavo, is involved with video over IP, and an engineer with Lavo, Erling Hedquist, from Germany, is going to be on the show with us. So he is next week, video over IP, and we're going to see how what we know about audio over IP applies to video over IP, and see if we can learn anything from video over IP to put back into audio over IP to help us do that job better. So that's coming up next week. A couple weeks from now, Bob Heil is going to be here. He's got equipment at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The guy's amazing. 50-year career in sound, and he's going to be our guest in 2 weeks. Bob Heil. And then 3 weeks from now, as we mentioned already, Patrick Kalani from Yamaha is going to be here to help us understand Dante and AES-67 and all these different things working together. And then finally, another guest that's just amazing, research fellow at Harman International, a fellow by the name of Sean Olive. Sean has done an amazing job of quantifying headphone performance with real numbers and actually determining how can we quantify the way a headphone sounds, when you got it on your head. And it has been a very subjective thing. And Sean has come up with some amazing ways to actually quantify that accurately so you can have a really good idea before you hear it of how good or bad a headphone is going to sound. And I don't know if he'll name any names or not, but I sure would like him to. So Sean Olive is coming up in about 4 weeks from now. All right, so that's your schedule. Hey, I want to thank very much Suncast at the GFQ Network for producing this show. Thanks very much, Suncast. Also, Andrew Zarian, the founder of the GFQ Network. We appreciate being on it. Thanks to Chris Tobin in New Jersey. Chris, really appreciate you coming along. We'll see you next week, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Yeah, this video over IP is going to be interesting. I'm going to depend on you to pepper the questions, I think.
Oh, I've got some good questions. Yeah, no, I've been doing a lot of that for the last several years, and despite what people might think, that's where the future is going, and radio should be riding those coattails. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
radio and TV are together now.
Yeah, well, TV's kind of riding our coattails to see, that's been working for a while. We should do that too. Just had to wait for switches to come along and do multi-gigabits.
Right, exactly. Well, like I used to tell friends of mine when I worked at a TV and radio facility, and they'd make fun of us in radio. I said, I've been having trouble with my vertical control in the car. Can you help me out with that? The raster is a little off on the screen in the car. I can't seem to get it right.
Picture rolls when we switch mics.
Now today I can do that raster control and video with this little device attached to my dashboard.
Uh-huh.
But now that radio can also do the same thing with the images. So radio is with pictures in the car when you have this device.
We'll have to find out about that.
Yes.
Keep that around for next week. All right, we got to go. Hey, tell your friends about This Week in Radio Tech, and we'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye, everybody.